Hello. We present excerpts from an interview with SS officer Evert Gottfried. He began the war in 1939 and ended it in the fall of 1944, after being wounded in a way that ended his service. This interview is quite interesting due to its facts. For example, you will learn why T-34 tanks were plastered with cement mortar. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Much more interesting content awaits you. How do you assess the tactics of the Russians in the winter of 1942? This is something worth serious consideration. The Russian soldier was undoubtedly incredibly resilient, capable of enduring the harshest conditions and showing true courage. But their command left much to be desired. Their tactical decisions boiled down to repeatedly using the same patterns, literally the same over and over. Only closer to 1944-45 did the situation start to change. Commanders learned how to effectively manage large units and conduct fast offensive operations that I will give an example. We retreated to the bridgehead fortification near Kirishi. This was a strategically important sector because the command hoped to start a new offensive from there. However, forces were already exhausted. We had only an enhanced regiment and some artillery, nothing more. Despite this, the Red Army kept trying again and again to capture this bridgehead. Attacks went one after another, always the same pattern. Our division destroyed about 200 Soviet tanks there. And all that was absolutely in vain. There was simply nothing for us to launch an offensive from there, and the Soviet side understood that perfectly. But there was an order from Stalin, and the troops went into battle again and again. Losses were colossal. Imagine a small area under constant fire from 3 well-aimed artillery regiments. As soon as we noticed the Russians beginning to move, artillery immediately worked on them, turning everything to dust. Our regiment practically ceased to exist during those 3 weeks. It was completely destroyed. But we had the opportunity to replace it. The Russians did not always. What weapons did your platoon have? The battalion comprised 3 rifle companies and 1 heavy weapons company. The latter included 2 platoons with heavy machine guns and 1 platoon equipped with 80mm mortars. The rifle platoon in a standard infantry company usually consisted of 4 squads. Each squad had 10 men under the command of a non-commissioned officer armed with a submachine gun. Each squad included 1 light machine gun. The rest of the soldiers carried carbines. In 1943 we received a new weapon, the automatic carbines known as Sturmgewehrs. Our regiment was chosen for army trials, and our battalion became the first fully rearmed unit with these rifles. This was a remarkable weapon that dramatically increased the combat capabilities of each soldier. Thanks to shortened cartridges, a soldier could carry significantly more ammunition. With this rifle, every soldier practically became a machine gunner. At first, like any new weapon, Sturmgewehrs had some teething problems, but soon they were resolved so successfully that machine guns were even removed from squad composition. However, by the end of 1943 near Kolpino, it became clear that in defensive conditions, the Sturmgewehr alone was insufficient. Machine guns were quickly returned to use. Eventually, the platoon again had both machine guns and assault rifles. There was no other weapon available. At the start of the war, the company also had 5cm mortars, but they were quickly withdrawn. There were 2 reasons. First, they were too heavy to carry, and second, the ammunition was heavy as well, making mortar use in battle extremely inconvenient. Is it true that the machine gun was the main weapon in defense? Yes, it is. But one must not forget that the primary striking weapon in defense is artillery. Artillery carries most of the load in repelling attacks. Infantry usually engages later, in case of unexpected breakthroughs or the need to secure a position. Specifically for infantry, the main defensive weapons were carbines, assault rifles, light and heavy machine guns. The heavy machine guns were mounted on special mounts. What were commanders armed with? Platoon and company commanders were usually armed with submachine guns and personal pistols. I, for example, had a Walther P-38, a reliable and convenient weapon. Did you have hand grenades? Of course. At the war's beginning, so-called stick grenades were used, the classic stick-type grenades, which were later withdrawn. Around 1942, more compact egg-shaped grenades began to be issued. They were not distributed universally, soldiers got them depending on the situation, for example, when preparing for an attack. Grenades were transported centrally in vehicles moving in the column because soldiers already carried a lot of gear. If grenades were issued, soldiers typically carried them in belt pouches, less commonly in backpacks as reserves. Were there weapon malfunctions in winter? Yes, particularly during severe frost, lubricants could freeze, causing weapon malfunctions. But this problem was easily solved, simply by completely removing the lubricant. Over time, experience grew, and such situations no longer confused us. Machine guns, including the MG-42, worked superbly, an excellent and extremely reliable model. Malfunctions were almost non-existent. Did you use captured weapons? Before I was first wounded, I once took a captured Russian submachine gun since I did not have a German one at the time. It turned out to be reliable and convenient. Where it ended up later, I do not know, that is a matter of chance. It worked perfectly. The magazines were either drum or stick type. Drum magazines were reliable but heavy and made the barrel feel pulled down, noticeable but not critical. Regarding the SVT rifle, I did not encounter it. Did you have to dig trenches near Kurishi? It was all swamps there. Trenches were dug constantly and extensively. Every soldier had an engineer's shovel on his belt, which allowed quick individual shelters to be dug. Additionally, the train carried engineer tools for more serious fortifications, which were used everywhere. In swampy terrain, we built bunkers out of tree trunks, walls made in 2 layers with a gap filled with earth. I personally made a shelter right in the Moscow-Leningrad railway embankment, covered on top with sleepers. It turned out very reliable. Were there snipers in your unit? There were few snipers. My family had 6 brothers, all served, 2 died. The eldest brother, Heinz, commanded a battalion in the same regiment I served in and awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. After the war, he spent many years in Soviet captivity. The youngest brother was a sniper in the 1st Königsberg Infantry Regiment. He was an excellent hunter and marksman. He had a real duel with a Russian sniper but unfortunately lost, making a single mistake. How often did you get leave? Usually, 3 weeks per year. Those serving in rear logistics could get leave more often. At the front, there were more hospital leaves. You were sent home to rest for about 3 weeks, then returned to the front. Travel to and from Shuga took about a month altogether, and a month without war was a luxury. Trains with leave troops departed from Gachina, then called Krasnogvardeysk. That I remember after one of my wounds, I took an excellent express train home. The most dangerous section was between Krasnogvardeysk, Luga, and Pskov, where partisans actively operated, sabotaging tracks and attacking trains. Once I escorted a reserve company from near Leningrad to Luga. Soldiers had no weapons. Partisans blew up a dam, the railway was damaged, and the train stopped. I was preparing for the worst, even ordering stones for defense. Fortunately, it ended well. Repair trains arrived from both sides quickly and restored the track and stopped the water in 1 day, but that day could have been catastrophic. What Russian weapon did you consider the most dangerous? Undoubtedly, the most formidable enemy weapon was the T-34 tank. We first encountered it in November 1941. Before that, light tanks and heavy KVs predominated, but T-34 was a real shock to us. We simply had no effective means to fight it. Our infantry regiment had only one platoon armed with 50 mm anti-tank guns, but even those could not penetrate the T-34's armor from the front. At that time, the T-34 surpassed all our models. The only truly effective means against it was the 37 mm flak anti-aircraft gun, a universal but cumbersome weapon. The T-34 was, without exaggeration, an excellent combat machine. Its operational range was great thanks to an economical diesel engine, allowing it to travel up to 500 kilometers on one refueling. In mobile warfare, this gave the Soviet Army huge advantages. Only with the introduction of Panther and Tiger tanks did the situation start to balance. These machines could successfully stand against the T-34 and other Soviet tanks. What means did you use to fight tanks? One of our main means was anti-tank mines, especially so-called T-mines, which we tried to throw onto the tank's engine compartment. For example, we destroyed a considerable number of T-34s near the Kirishi Bridge. That we were also among the first issued cumulative magnetic mines, a novelty. You throw the mine, it sticks to the armor, and its directed explosion penetrates it. But the Russians quickly found a solution. They began to cover tank hulls with a layer of cement, which disrupted the magnets functioning. Later, in 1944 near Narva, we were issued Faust patrons, bazooka-type weapons. As a company commander, I was the first to personally try this weapon. Very powerful, convenient, and truly effective. However, the Russians quickly responded to this as well. Would you like any part of this translated in a more summarized way or adapted for a specific use? Tank units stopped allowing infantry closer than 80 meters. They would stop tanks at distances of 100 to 200 meters and fire accurately with their guns, preventing our soldiers from getting close. During the retreat, we lost a huge amount of anti-tank artillery. The Army Group Center alone left about 700 guns on the battlefield. They were too bulky and heavy. If there was no transport or fuel shortage, they were simply abandoned. Thus, we were practically left without long-range anti-tank weapons. Soviet tank crews quickly realized this and began operating at a distance. They did not engage in close combat but methodically destroyed our positions with direct fire. Trench-bound infantry suffered the most. When a soldier digs a shelter, a mound of earth remains nearby. If there is no time to camouflage it, it is easy to spot from a tank. Such positions were destroyed one by one. This heavily affected soldiers' morale. Many fell into a depressed state, feeling powerless. Fortunately, by that time I had already been evacuated. I was wounded during one phase of the retreat. Everything I'm telling now is from those who stayed there. They had to endure truly hellish conditions. So it can be said with confidence that any army quickly adapts to new enemy weapons. But thousands died during that process, those who were issued Faust patrons, Panzerfausts, those who knew how to use them. Though essentially a very simple, primitive weapon. Eventually, almost all infantry was armed with them. The Russians quickly copied the Faust patron, and soon the whole world was literally flooded with its modifications, including the RPG-7. These RPGs later appeared everywhere, from Arabs to Africans. Anyone used them. Now in any hotspot, you can see someone posing with one. What can you say about Russian artillery? Russian artillery was a real force, powerful, numerous, and accurate. Once it literally shot me out of a bunker. It was their 76 mm gun, often used to suppress defensive strongpoints. We were in the second echelon, the first line had already been breached. Suddenly, an explosion about 100 meters in front of us. I immediately thought it was targeting us. 2 minutes later another shell landed behind the bunker at the same distance. I shouted, "Get out of here," and we jumped out just in time. The third shell hit the bunker precisely, completely destroying it. They caught us perfectly, like a textbook case. Had we hesitated, we would have been buried under the rubble. At the front, you quickly learn, adapt or die. It's like hunting. Old hares know all the trails. Russian artillery was truly formidable. How did Russian aviation perform? At the start of the war, it was hardly visible, almost non-existent. The Germans quickly destroyed most Soviet planes. I remember a squadron of Soviet bombers attacking Dunkerque. Almost all were shot down except one plane. Initially, the Soviet Air Force rarely interfered. Sometimes fighters called I-16s appeared, but rarely. Everything changed when we began to retreat. Then the Russians bombed us more actively. Even then, they were not as dangerous as British or American air forces. Those had truly formidable aviation. Did you have nicknames for Russian ground attack planes? Of course, these planes were called attack aircraft by the Russians. I think we are talking about the IL-2. They were partially armored and performed attacks from low altitude, which was very annoying. I fired at them but honestly never shot one down. In 1944, they caused us a lot of trouble. There were lice infestations, ovshi, oh yes, lots of them. You couldn't really wash at the positions. It was dirty and cold, and lice constantly infested us. Blankets were full of lice that I remember. Near Kirishi, I had just returned from leave, skiing in the Alps, and here was frozen ground, impossible to dig a trench. We had to blow it up at night with dynamite to make even shallow pits, from which we then constructed makeshift dugouts. During the day, no movement was possible. Russians opened fire immediately. There was no heating, no stove, no wood. Even if there had been, smoke would have given away our position and the next grenade would hit us that we lay still and the lice chewed on us. It was awful. We fought it as best we could. In Kirishi, they built a special stove for sterilizing clothes, a 200-liter barrel, water at the bottom, then a wooden grate, clothes on top covered with a lid, where steam would kill parasites. Did you have washing soap? Yes, soap and fresh underwear were provided regularly, which worked well in the defense. The clothes were turned in and washed. Mostly Russian women did laundry in the rear. But when movements began, all this was forgotten. Did you believe you would survive the war? No, I didn't believe it. I was certain that at some point I would be killed. After 7 wounds, it seemed inevitable. But at the front, you don't think like that, or you go insane or run away. A soldier understands death can come any second. If you constantly think about that, you won't last. You fought in swamps, cold, while others were in France or Italy. Did you see this as unfair? Not exactly. We understood how it was, but it was very frustrating to be thrown into battle poorly equipped and still expected to deliver results. That angered us. That it was clear that winter in Russia is no surprise. How could one start such a campaign unprepared for the cold? Russia is not France. France could be rushed through and occupied, but not Russia. It is a colossal country. I later learned that even in July 1940, before the French campaign ended, General Halder's diary recorded, "The Führer's eyes are turned east." 2 very competent officers, General Marx, Chief of Staff of the 18th Army, and General von Zotingstern, were ordered to start developing an offensive plan against the USSR. They quickly realized that without capturing Moscow, nothing would work. Moscow is the center from which all communications radiate, so the main strike had to be on the central direction. But what about the flanks? The final plan resulted in a strong central thrust and huge gaps on the flanks near Veliky Luki and Kolm in the north and near Gomel in the south. Those gaps could not be closed, though the intention was to reach the Urals. Imagine how large those gaps would have been. That was not acceptable. Officers stated this directly, but the decision was made that the Red Army could be destroyed in the main encirclement pockets, and if that succeeded, the territory could be occupied, and indeed, that almost happened. But only almost. By winter 1941, the Wehrmacht's strength was broken. The German army lost the war in Russia in the winter of 41. In 1942, we barely restored combat capability but could no longer launch offensives everywhere, only in the south. On other sectors, the forces were insufficient.